Did you know that before the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, there was another Spider-Man movie in the works? One that was written and very nearly directed by the king of the world himself, James Cameron. Unfortunately, that movie was just not meant to be, so it has faded away into obscurity as one of the many legends of fandom. Greetings fanboys and fangirls, I'm Erod and I'm the Blockbuster Buster, and welcome to Legends of Fandom, where I talk about fanboy films and shows that almost happened. Today, we're talking about James Cameron's Spider-Man, but before we get to that, I have to take you back in time to a time before the Marvel Cinematic Universe, a time before comic book movies ruled the box office, a very weird, bizarre, crazy time called the 80s. Warner Brothers had experienced massive success with the Richard Donner Superman films, and Tim Burton's Batman was on the horizon. Enter Cannon Films, a moderately successful production company that was looking to expand and become its own studio. Noticing the sudden trend of successful comic book-based films, Cannon licensed the film rights to Spider-Man for a measly $225,000. FYI, the film rights to Spider-Man are worth a hell of a lot more than that today. The masterminds at Cannon Films were so confident that this was going to be the project that was going to launch their company forward that they took out a 5-page ad on Variety magazine advertising the film. They made a poster. They commissioned Marvel to use one of their promotional stills as a comic book cover. And they even made a teaser trailer, which you can watch right now on YouTube. Just a quick reminder, at this point, they hadn't shot a single foot of film. Hell, they didn't even have a script yet. Throughout the 5 years that Cannon held the film rights to Spider-Man, many versions of the script were drafted. One of the few elements that remained through the Cameron version and eventually the Raimi movies was Peter Parker having organic web shooters. Yes, that concept existed since the 80s. The question is, why did the team at Cannon Films want to give Spider-Man organic web shooters? You see, Cannon Films co-founder Manahem Colin's vision for the movie was more horror-based, and he intended for Spider-Man to be portrayed as a classic monster, a freak, an outcast that would be shunned by society. Hell, the first director to be attached to the project was Tobe Hooper, best known as the creator and director of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Thankfully, Spider-Man co-creator Stan Lee fought this concept and heavily negotiated with Golan to get the film to have the same tone and style as the comic. And so, one of the compromises that they reached was for Peter Parker to have freakish organic web shooters. Now, why did this concept stay with the project all the way through the next 2 iterations? I have no idea. But the canon Spider-Man was just not meant to be, as a lot of poor business decisions kept decreasing the movie's budget. 2 of the biggest films that they produced for Warner Brothers, Superman 4: The Quest for Peace and Masters of the Universe, completely bombed, causing a lot of potential Spider-Man investors to back out. Eventually, they had to shelve the movie. They say that in the 5 years that Cannon held the film rights to Spider-Man, they spent an estimated $10 million on a movie they never filmed. In 1990, Carolco bought Spider-Man's film rights from Cannon for a measly $5 million, fully intended to hand over the reins of the franchise to self-professed Spidey fan James Cameron, who had just done a stellar job with Carolco's upcoming blockbuster film Terminator 2: Judgment Day. So, in 1 year's time, Terminator 2 would be released and would go on to be one of the highest grossing movies of the year, giving Carolco's Cameron-helmed Spider-Man movie the vindication that it needed. Furthermore, another name that remained prominently attached to the film in its early stages was Arnold Schwarzenegger, who had been approached to play Dr. Octopus. Now, if that seems like an odd choice, another name that was attached to the project in its early stages was Kevin Spacey as Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin. Let that sink in for a minute. Inevitably, Cameron would apply his ample writing talents to the project and write his own treatment and eventually his own script. But the question remains, what would James Cameron's Spider-Man be like? For starters, many have speculated that due to the success of Terminator 2, the actor most likely to play Peter Parker in Cameron's Spider-Man was Edward Furlong. This is incorrect. Cameron's top contender to play the titular hero was Leonardo DiCaprio, an actor Cameron was already considering for a future collaboration. Now, as opposed to Peter Parker being portrayed as a socially handicapped nerd, In this movie, he would have been portrayed as an awkward outsider who never in a million years would have had a chance with Mary Jane Watson, played by the lovely and talented Nikki Cox, best known for Unhappily Ever After in Las Vegas. So, Peter and MJ would have gotten partnered for a school project, and in the process of working together, the two would hit it off and begin their romance. During this time, Peter gets bitten by a spider that's not radioactive. That's right, in Cameron's version, Peter Parker does not get bitten by a radioactive spider. Instead, he gets bitten by a spider that ate a genetically engineered fruit fly. The spider bite leads to Peter experiencing a horrific hallucinatory nightmare invoking Kafka's The Metamorphosis. And thus, when he wakes up, Peter discovers that he has spider powers and creates his Spider-Man suit and web shooters as subterfuge to hide his powers, to make it appear that his abilities come from his costume and web shooters and not from him, as he believes that if his abilities are discovered, he would be shunned by society as a freak. The script brilliantly uses Peter's developing abilities as a metaphor for puberty, as Peter is concerned that society will not accept the man that he is becoming. So Peter employs his awesome new suit and amazing powers to start his career as not a wrestler, but a street performer. A TV executive eventually approaches Spider-Man and offers him his own show. It is during this portion of the script that Spider-Man witnesses a mugging and does nothing to stop it. The mugger, of course, gets away and goes on to kill Peter's Uncle Ben, which then inspires him to take up crime fighting, and that mugger would have been played by the late Bill Paxton. Cameron's script is a bit notorious for having some light profanity, and an implied sex scene between Peter and MJ on the Brooklyn Bridge. There's even a scene in which Spider-Man threatens a criminal by telling him that he will use his intestines to decorate a Christmas tree. Now, if this sounds a little out of sorts for the webhead, please keep in mind that this script was written in the 90s, and comic books were a hell of a lot more intense back then. This is the same era where Green Lantern became a villain and killed the Guardians of the Universe. Batman got his back broken, and Superman died. The main villain in Cameron's script was Electro, played by the legendary Lance Henriksen. But if you were hoping to see Max Dillon flying around New York City in his lightning mask and yellow booties, you would have been in for some huge disappointment. The Electro in Cameron's script is a corrupt evil businessman named Carlton Strand, a megalomaniacal parody of a corrupt capitalist who can see through Spider-Man's facade and knows that Peter has superhuman abilities just like him. Strand believes there is an oncoming superior race of superhumans on the horizon, and he believes that Spider-Man and himself are among them. So he sends his top henchman to recruit him, the Sandman, who is not Flint Marko in the script. He is simply called Boyd. Are we sure Cameron was a fan? In Cameron's version, Sandman would have been played by Michael Biehn, as a career criminal who got his powers when he got caught in a nuclear explosion on a beach. Presumably, the plan was to apply the same style of special effects used to create T-1000 in Terminator 2 to bring the Sandman's powers to life. Fun fact, Cameron's intent to use Electro and Sandman as the main villains in this movie was the reason why the two characters do not appear in the early seasons of the 1994 Spider-Man cartoon. Sandman was replaced by Hydro Man, and Electro doesn't show up until almost the end of the show. Anyway, so Electro offers Spidey a place in his organization, and even offers him money which he can use to pay for Aunt May's hospital bills. An offer that Spider-Man declines because action is his reward. So Strand then makes Spider-Man's life a living hell. He tries to frame Spider-Man by having his henchmen commit crimes while dressed like Spider-Man. He also funds J. Jonah Jameson's campaign against the hero. Oh, by the way, Jameson would have been played by Michael Douglas. So, after seeing Spider-Man save Mary Jane from a mugger, and then take her swinging around the city, Strand Electro figures out that MJ is Spider-Man's weak spot. So, you guessed it, he kidnaps Mary Jane. One of the recurring locations throughout the movie would have been the top of the World Trade Center. Being the tallest structures in New York at the time, it would have made sense for Spider-Man to use its rooftops as his preferred hangout, as it is a place where hardly anyone could reach him. The movie's climax would have taken place here, with Spider-Man fighting both Electro and Sandman to save Mary Jane, and eventually revealing his secret identity to her. Now, whether you think Cameron's script is good or not, please keep in mind that this was his first draft. Many things could have changed by the time the movie made it to theaters. The real question is, if this movie has so many big names attached to it, how come it didn't happen? Well, In 1996, the unthinkable happened. Both Carolco and Marvel went bankrupt, in the process of which MGM Studios seized Carolco's assets, which included Cameron's Spider-Man script. Marvel tried to regain said assets through legal means. All that did was trap Spider-Man in legal limbo for about 4 years, and eventually, Spider-Man's film rights expired and reverted back to Marvel, who then sold them to Columbia/Sony, who would then go on to produce the movies that we know and love. MGM did try to dispute the legality of this, but nothing came of it. To this day, Cameron says that Spider-Man is the best movie he never made. But what do you think? Would you have liked to have seen James Cameron's Spider-Man? Or are you happy with the way things turned out? Feel free to say so in the comment section below, as this concludes today's video. So, do you know of any other unmade fanboy films or shows that you would like me to talk about? Let me know at erod@inbox.com. And who knows, one of them might end up being the topic of the next Legends of Fandom. Until next time, I'm Erod, and I'm the Blockbuster Buster.
Neighborhood Spider-Man, wealth and fame, he's ignored. Action is his reward to him. Life is a great big day. Wherever there's a hang, you'll find a Spider-Man.